Hey, friends, welcome back to the Reasoned Reality Podcast. My name is Joe Smith. I'm your host. Today, I've got a special guest. With me today is retired Air Force Major Steve Nolan. Steve Nolan spent decades in the military, and last 2 decades, if I remember you saying that correctly, was spent like in the mental health area, which is why what we're going to talk about is so relevant to the things that you have experienced, seen, that you've written about. And I'm really excited to dive into your book, American Carnage, An Officer's Duty to Warn, and to the work that you're doing now. So I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to share your insights and your story with all of us.
Yeah, well, thanks, Joe. I'm glad to be here, and thanks for having me on.
So, full disclosure, I'm friends with your daughter, and she has actually helped me like co-host an episode. And so we were talking, and she actually handed me your book, and I had time because I had a conference that I was traveling to and from, and had time to go through your book. I thought you did a very good job of outlining everything that, especially in the first administration, just the overwhelming, and it is overwhelming when it's page after page after page after page. You did a good job. What drove you to decide to do that?
Well, that's pretty simple to answer because it's right in the subtitle of my book. So the book's called American Carnage. Of course, that was Trump's famous phrase from his first inauguration address, where he tried to convince America that we were just nothing but in carnage and he was going to fix it all. But the subtitle is An Officer's Duty to Warn. So even though I'm retired, when you take that oath to the Constitution for 30 years, like I did, and you have the buku, is the expression, buku experience with this diagnosis that I did in my career. In other words, I discharged Donald Trump's these personality disorders throughout my career, and I had a duty to inform. It's just been amazing. I wrote the book, published the book in 2020, and that this basic fact, this simple fact, like you were talking about, how easy it is to give examples. So the book, I've got scores and scores and scores of examples of what is wrong with his mental health and why he would be disqualified from the military and kicked out of the military, or he would have gone to prison if he'd already sexually assaulted or stole top secret documents or committed fraud. All the crimes that he's been found guilty of. So there was this duty to do this. I've been trying to educate, but unfortunately, I'm not famous. I'm not Mary Trump, his niece. She actually wrote a very good book about his mental health, and I'm not. She caught on for about 6 months and then faded. I was sorry into the background. I don't know why. Maybe people thought she's too close to the forest as a family member and is not to be trusted or something. I don't know. I don't want to guess about anything. Mm-hmm. But my book is based on a lot of experience, and of course, since the book, there's hundreds and hundreds of examples, and they're almost daily. There's new ones just since this the conference that was interrupted by this would-be assassin, because again, Trump's news conferences or press conferences, they're completely abnormal. They're always abnormal because this diagnosis is that much out of touch with what we would call, normal life, normal thinking, normal morals, etc.
So you kept referring to, and of course I've read your book, but I want to dive into it just a little bit. You are a professional. You are an expert in your field. And as you were talking, you kept talking about this diagnosis. And what would that be? And could you just, in like layman's terms, kind of explain what it means?
Yeah. And first I'll do a disclaimer because
right.
the mental health professionals have been shut up and silenced in this because of what's called the Goldwater rule, which is a very good rule. Don't get me wrong. I don't disagree with it. Where you can't diagnose someone who's not your patient.
Right.
But in this case, you don't really have to. I do urge everyone, and in the beginning of my book, in the first couple pages of my book, I put all the criteria for antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. And I urge anyone, you can Google it, on your cell phone, and just read them. And anybody doing that, including you're not a mental health professional, so you're not going to diagnose Donald Trump. But what you're going to see, to your amazement, is that he meets all the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder and all the criteria, and this is really bad, for antisocial. And antisocial is what lay people, what you would call sociopath, psychopath. Those aren't clinical terms. Those aren't terms that I ever used in my career. It's called antisocial personality disorder. But that's what you're talking about. Serial killers, serial rapists, the worst of the worst. And Trump meets all that criteria. In fact, when I did prison work, I was the chief of mental health for an Army prison early in my career and a Navy prison late in my career. I had a lot of sex offenders, rapists, and pedophiles on my caseload. And I learned something you don't learn in graduate school, that these sex offenders are personality disorders. And that's why the recidivism rate is so high and why they're not curable. And it's no coincidence that Trump, Jeffrey Epstein, this whole Epstein thing is around that one part of this. It's a lot more serious than that. And if we have a chance, the two most serious things were Helsinki and January 6th, where you see this pathology, not in a sexual arena, but in a treasonous arena. First one having to do with Putin and Russia, the second one having to do with trying to violently overthrow the government of the United States and giving his vice president, Mike Pence, an illegal order not to certify a legitimate election. We've all gone crazy in the fact that someone could do that, and then 77 million Americans still vote for that person. And then after trying to violently overthrow our government, he was found guilty in a rape case, and he was found guilty in a fraud case where on all 34 counts, and people didn't slow down enough to absorb this, on 34 counts of fraud, 12 members of our society, random jury, voted unanimously guilty on all 34 counts. That's incredible, except not for me. With this diagnosis that lacks a conscience, none of this is surprising. It's all sort of run in the mill for this. But the criteria that I'm referring to, that I urge anybody to read and then do your own diagnosis, even though you're not allowed to diagnose, they're long. So a shortcut to this diagnosis is to think of it this way. They cannot feel sympathy. They cannot feel empathy. They're pathological liars, and they do not choose right over wrong. Luckily, it's a rare diagnosis because there aren't too many people, I would hope, in your life, Joe, where anything that goes against this person is wrong, and anything in their favor is right, and that's their definition of right and wrong. But that is this diagnosis. It just seems like it's not believable. Or even simpler, if you want to put it in the simplest terms, there isn't anyone in your life, I don't think, Joe, or anyone you've met, that, your cousin, your uncle, your brothers, your friends, that every single time you talk to them, they lie to you. And if they did, you would say, they've got a screw loose. They can never tell the truth. But we've allowed someone to become president of the United States who never tells the truth. Well, there isn't any job in America you can keep if you can't tell the truth. You couldn't sling hamburgers at McDonald's and lie to your boss and your coworkers without getting fired. But we're all in an Orwellian world where this one criteria alone, the pathological lying, where you couldn't keep any job, we've allowed to be president of the United States and control nuclear weapons. But there's no speech, including his press conference about the would-be shooter at the media event this weekend that was supposed to take place. He just can't tell the truth.
No, you know what? That makes so much sense. Obviously not being a mental health professional at all. But one of the conversations that, I can't even count how many times, in a month, this kind of thing kind of comes up, but it's almost just like and it's almost like you're just shocked. You shouldn't be, or taken by surprise, and you shouldn't be anymore. But it just feels, like you said, unbelievable that somebody would do the things or say the things that come out of that man's mouth. And so, like you mentioned, like the shooting that happened. We're recording this the Monday after the attempted quote unquote assassination at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and just the things that it makes sense. It makes so much sense, because if somebody is incapable of feeling empathy, if somebody is incapable of feeling sympathy, if somebody is incapable of telling the truth, then that it connects so many dots. Does that make sense?
Well, and in this case, in a bizarre sort of way, it's worked in his favor. And so, since we've never had a president, and I mean this literally, since George Washington to Trump and all those people in between, none of them do any of the things he does, including this much lying. But in his case, everyone, sadly and in a, just horribly, has taken all these crazy things that he does and then just said, well, that's Donald. Like somehow that's just who he is. So we are accepting these things that are unacceptable. That's why I'll go back to the simplest terms, which is a private in the military. So we're letting Trump get away with things that are just absolutely disqualifying. Like if you turn to the back of my book, because I remember my editor saying, "What do you want to put on the back of the book?" Because she'd published three previous books of mine, and you usually find some other author to say something nice about you on your fly page on the back. But it's funny, she and I picked the same paragraph, so I thought, well, that proves we should use it. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read it.
Yeah, please.
Because this is the simplest terms to understand Trump. If I had any service member, okay, Air Force, Army, Marines, Navy, any young 18, 19, 20-year-old, who stated that sexual assault was due to putting men and women together, who refused to believe that the commander in chief was a U.S. citizen, who thought he knew more than the generals, who believed that enemy leadership was stronger than American leadership, that the Geneva Conventions ties the hands of our military, or that a free press is the enemy of the people, or proven U.S. intelligence is a hoax, or neo-Nazis are fine people, I would be obligated to discharge that person from the military. These are all public, on-camera statements of Donald Trump that would disqualify you from being a private in the Army, but we're allowing him to be commander-in-chief. Or another example would be we're still asking young, the best of the best. We're asking young high school graduates to go to the Air Force Academy or Annapolis Naval Academy or West Point, and as soon as they get there, they have to take an oath. They will not lie, steal, or cheat, nor tolerate amongst them anyone who does. And we've given them a leader who is a 34 count felon and a sex offender and who stole top secret documents and took them home, which would kill anyone's career instantly in the military. So that's a house divided that cannot stand. We're asking all of our young troops to come in and be moral and follow rules and regulations and the law. But the only one exempt from that is the ultimate boss. He doesn't have to obey any of it. And we've been betrayed. I mean, so we have our first mentally ill president. It's unprecedented. And it used to be called character disorder. I wish they didn't change the name to personality disorder because I think it's confusing. Just like the term narcissism, I think is confusing because it has a common lay meaning. But it's just an abdication of responsibility. But the odds that a president would come along who's totally corrupt, and then Congress at the same time couldn't live up to their oath of office is just incredible. But that's what we're up against. And in the GOP, only Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger 2 members out of the entire Congress, Republican end of the Congress, lived up to their oath of office to protect the Constitution of the United States.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And you brought something up, and I wanted to read this. This is part of your final thoughts. It's the final paragraph. And when I read this, I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to ask. So I'm going to read this so people can understand. It's not a very long paragraph, but this is you speaking. Both my parents served in World War II. My 2 older brothers served in Vietnam, and I served in Afghanistan. We all witnessed tremendous sacrifices for this country. My father-in-law was shot 3 times by a Japanese Zero and miraculously survived. His younger brother, John, was killed on Iwo Jima, strafed across the abdomen by machine gun fire. I often think of him in the landing craft going toward that beach and the commitment that he and so many others were willing to make to pay the ultimate sacrifice for their country and for freedom. Then I think of the many members of our present Congress who are thus far unwilling to even risk re-election. I hope that some or many have a change of heart/conscience and muster enough courage to act selflessly on behalf of our democracy before it's too late. You wrote those words several years ago.
Yes.
Several years ago.
It all came to fruition. And I've even had my own local congressman look me in the eye. And when I've asked him, why can't you tell the truth about Donald Trump? He said, because they primary me. And so it's this admission of cowardice. So they're still asking these members of Congress, they're still asking 18, 19, 20-year-olds to go get their legs and arms blown off or die for their country. But they will not have enough courage to risk re-election. They're afraid of the base. That's another way they'll put it. The base, Donald's got control of the base, and the base won't vote me in. Even a cop who walks the beat and in other professions are willing to, firefighters, another good example, are people that are willing to risk their lives. They don't know if they're going to come home tonight when they respond to a domestic violence incident or a four-alarm fire, but they're willing to do it for all of us. And our politicians, this is how far we've fallen since my parents' generation in Congress. They openly admit their cowardice. They won't risk their lives. They won't risk their jobs to just tell the simple truth. And where it all went downhill in a really profound way was Helsinki. I'm going to go back to that because it was so important, because this was the biggest lie I'd ever heard told in my adult life. Now, I'd heard Donald already tell hundreds of lies, but he went to Helsinki and he met with Vladimir Putin, and then he went before the cameras of the world and said that I don't see any reason why it would be Russia, this cyber warfare and the interference in our election. Well, it was already proven. We were indicting 12 Russian army officers for those very crimes, our Department of Justice, or you could say Trump's Department of Justice, because he was president. So his own Department of Justice, and this is the only good thing about personality disorders, is logic and reasoning breaks down. So he's indicting 12 army officers, and then he signs into law himself, Donald Trump, on August 2nd, I believe, 2017, economic sanctions against Russia for the crimes that he's telling us every time he gets in front of a camera are a Russian hoax, or a deep state against him. See, he signed it, and Congress voted 517-5. That was him. I did put this in my book. To put on these sanctions on Russia for what? Because he's saying to the cameras that it's a hoax and a witch hunt, but he himself put in the sanctions. Just like another example, again, when you're interviewing a soldier, a sergeant or corporal or private, these things break down real quick in the interview. Like they think they're so clever, but the logic and reasoning never matches up. And another good one, but it's a big one, has to do with the election himself, that Trump then and to this day says he won the election against Joe Biden. But the personality disorder, he got on a helicopter and flew to Mar-a-Lago, giving the fraud, because he said Joe Biden was a fraud and stole the election. So he He ran away and gave the job to the guy who was a fraud. You see what I mean? It makes no sense logically. He left the job, went into civilian life, and then he's told us ever since, and this again is the extent of this deep mental pathology, is to this day, every chance he gets, he says that he won that election and it was stolen by election fraud. But all the facts are there. And the thing I try to remind people whenever I do an interview like this or give a speech is that please don't take my word for any of this, because everything I tell you is not Steve Nolan's opinion. If you hear something that you think is my opinion, stop me and I'll apologize to you or prove to you. Not only is it not my opinion, it's American history. So it's American history that that Mike Pence, our vice president, refused an illegal order and certified that election. It's American history that our Attorney General William Barr resigned because the president asked him to lie, because our Attorney General went to our president and said he looked into voter fraud in all 50 states and there was no there. And Trump refused to accept that. So our Attorney General resigned. That's not my opinion that he resigned.
Yeah, that happened.
And the next day, 2017, after 140 of our police officers were wounded and Officer Brian Sicknick died January 7th, the next day, Betsy DeVos and Elaine Chao, two other members of the cabinet, resigned in protest of an assault on a peaceful transfer of power. That's not my opinion. These are actually important facts of American history that anyone can look up. And you haven't heard a peep out of them since. Shame on them. But you also haven't heard Elaine Chao or Betsy DeVos or Mike Pence or William Barr say, I was wrong. Please erase this from American history. Donald Trump actually was elected and there was a fraud. No, they're shutting their mouths because they told the truth. At least they were willing to sacrifice their jobs for it, unlike our senators and representatives right now protecting him. But if they knew what I knew, I think they would stop protecting him.
Well, let me ask you a question. I want to dive into that just a little bit because, you know, one of the things that's I think is shocking or surprising or confusing, whatever word you want to use, for so many people that are just out here, you know, you watch these Senate hearings or you watch these interviews and people will twist themselves and say the dumbest things, like RFK Jr. talking about how Trump uses different math for his percentages. I saw a video the other day where I don't remember what they were confirming him for, but he would not answer the question about did Trump lose 2020? They keep saying things like, well, Joe Biden was certified. And they're saying, no, that's not the question I'm asking. I need you to say this. It's a matter of American history, like you said. What is it? I mean, from, you know, you having all the experience that you have, you're watching this, your finger is still on the pulse of everything. You're still very active in speaking out against this. What causes a person to just willingly, in front of so many people, the American public, to just denigrate themselves for the sake of this president? Do you know? Does that make sense? What I'm asking?
Yeah, it does. It's a difficult one for me because I can't relate to it, but I can answer.
Right.
I can answer your question, but give me a second to have a little preface here. Is that it's hard for me to relate this because I spent my entire adult life around people, mostly really young people, just out of their teens, who were willing to give their life and limb for their country. So it's hard for me to wrap my mind around these things, but I know there's nothing new about it. You know, great authors, Shakespeare, you know, the Greeks, everybody's always written about these things, greed and, you know, power lust and cowardice. I guess we see it in grade school when we see our first bully, and then we notice that the bully's got little chums that are happier to chum around with the bully than to protect you or anybody pushed down on the schoolyard, you know, that sort of thing. So it shouldn't be shocking to us. We have early examples. The most dramatic example, and I think it's the most relevant to right now and your question, even though, you know, we have to say we're not so damn virtuous, is Nazi Germany. So, and so now you're talking about what people call mass psychology. So how could a nation, a Christian nation, because Germany was just all Germans and Jews, Christians and Jews, all, Abrahamic descendants. So
Mm-hmm.
how could a nation that built itself like us on the Ten Commandments and the rule of law abdicate everything they thought they believed in and said they believed in and continue to preach, because churches didn't close down under Hitler? They kept
Mm-hmm.
meeting on Sundays. How could everyone become the one tagging along with the bully? And I don't have a good answer for it, but it's the truth. It happens. We have examples of it. Like I said, we have small examples. Um, sometimes we make fun of them in comedy and TV shows and all, where you've got um, you got like the motorcycle gang leader, and everybody follows the leader, kind of thing, even if he's breaking the law. And so we do have these minor examples, but we didn't think it would happen to our Congress. I didn't. I was naive in that sense, because I lived through Richard Nixon and what happened with Nixon. And this is why it's absolutely essential that this be understood as mental illness. Our first mentally ill president is that Richard Nixon was corrupt, but when he got caught with an illegal burglary called Watergate, the GOP leadership marched down to the White House and said, "Boss, the jig is up. It's all over. You're caught." And because Nixon was not mentally ill, he resigned. In other words, it would have never occurred to Nixon in a million years to say, I'm not going to resign. I'm going to say there's a deep state out to get me. And suddenly the FBI and the CIA and the Department of Justice and all of these institutions are wrong. And actually, they're more than wrong. They're out to assassinate and get me. And I'm not going to admit my mistake. I'm going to attack them. This is what he's accomplished. We have these institutions that were vital to our national security: FBI, CIA, Department of Justice, the military. And he is slowly brainwashing each and every one and decapitating them of moral leadership and putting in his own sycophants. And it boggles the mind. You say that could never happen, but it already happened in 1930s Germany. It's just that we're going to have to admit, and maybe this is the only good thing that's going to come out of Trump, is that we're going to have to admit that we're not, human psychology is not different, whether it's German, whether it's American, whether it's anything, Israeli, that basic human psychology is the same, and we are all vulnerable to the same propaganda, lies, and this ties into sermons as well. This ties into, you can cherry pick history, you can cherry pick scripture, you can just feed your congregation or your following or your political party anything that you want them to hear. But it's the pathological mind. Trump's taken that to another level, and every politician knows this. They've never heard anybody in their party or the other party do these kinds of things: attack our greatest military heroes,
Mm-hmm.
um, the things that are just really pathological. Rob Reiner, go after stand-up comics, go after, I don't know if you remember when Rob Reiner, this famous actor, director, and his wife were recently murdered. It's not slightly abnormal for a president to say something derogatory about them. It's off the scale abnormal. In fact, if I know I'm going on here, so interrupt me anytime you want. But if I can give one example in my book, an early example, it's trivial in the sense that, unlike Putin and Russia, it doesn't threaten our national security. But it's a simple example of the level of his pathology, and that was, he did an interview long before Trump was a politician. He did an interview with a show called Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, run by this guy
I remember
Robin.
that. Yeah.
And Trump had a newborn daughter with, I think it was Tiffany, and his wife was Marla Maples. And Robin Leach says, "Who does your daughter take after?" And what Trump says is that, well, she's got her mother's legs. Whether she develops her large breasts remains to be seen. Now, that's not slightly abnormal, Joe. I would say that there's no male in your life not your grandfather, your father, your brothers, your uncles, your cousins. There's no male friends. There's no one you've ever met, actually. This is how abnormal this is. There's no male you've ever met who, if he was asked the question, who does your daughter take after, would answer about the size of her breasts. This is the deviancy. And it is relevant in the sense that we're not rid of the Epstein files yet. So there's a sexual deviancy with Trump that's off the scale abnormal. It's just you've never unprecedentedly abnormal. Now let's go to something that really counts: national security. I'm not saying that these individual sexual assaults don't count, but they don't threaten national security. So the same lack of conscience that lets you attack a woman in a dressing room. Jean Carroll won a $5 million case, sexual assault case against Trump. The same lack of morals that lets you attack an individual lets you fall in love with dictators like Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, Saudi prince. And again, I always see these things as a clinician, and I know the public doesn't pick up on these things, but he does things that are just classic offender moves, gestures. Like he had the Saudi prince. Now, the Saudi prince was in the Oval Office a few months ago, and Prince Salman murdered a journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, and not just murdered him. He was cut up alive with a bone saw in the Turkish embassy for the crime of punishing, for the crime of publishing articles against the Saudi family. Now Trump knows that. Anyone in the intelligence community read the CIA report. And they know what happened to Jamal Khashoggi, that he was murdered by the prince. So it actually should be creepy. Like for you and I, we probably would refuse to meet the prince because he's a murderer and a brutal murderer. But maybe for some reasons you decide, national reasons, you're going to meet him, but you wouldn't be thrilled about it. It would be a very low-key thing. Trump took his hands and pumped the Saudi prince's hands in our Oval Office and said, I don't care where these hands have been. It's creepy. Again, you get back to the 10 Commandments and all of our morals. It all goes out the window because with this particular diagnosis, none of that matters. All that matters is, does the prince like Donald? Does Putin like Donald? If they like him, he likes them.
Actually, he literally just said that.
I was going to say, he just said that a few days ago.
He did.
He's on tape, and he said something about the person not being a good person. Do you remember this?
Doesn't matter.
They're bad.
If they like me, then I'm going to fight for him.
Now, here's the thing where he gets a pass. Ever since he said that quote many years ago, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and not lose a vote, people think that everything he says is not to be taken seriously, like it's a joke. Instead, as a clinician, what I see is these constant confessions to what he is. And they go back to these simple terms of, we don't allow this with a private or a corporal. It's an instant disqualification. I mean, you'll be called on the carpet. You'll have a chance to defend yourself. Like you want to have an autographed picture of Putin in your dorm room. What's that all about? And you could defend yourself. And maybe your answer is, I had 6 beers and I was drunk, and we're not going to punish you. We're going to say, don't do it again, but take down the picture of our enemy. But with Trump, he does these things that are unacceptable for a private or corporal. And we all of us are guilty of this. It's like, well, that's Trump. Somehow that's Trump. It's what I call, if your uncle robbed a bank, we'd all agree he should go to jail. He got caught robbing a bank. But then if you tell us, my uncle's robbed 250 banks and never been caught, and then we're all saying, man, he must be some kind of genius. That's what we've done with Trump, is that he's a career criminal, and now evidence is pouring in almost daily that the entire family is engaged in criminal enterprise as far as using the presidency to make billions of dollars, particularly off the Arab states. But now Venezuela as well. He went and took the Venezuela oil, and it's in a bank account in Qatar. What's that all about? Or taking, the corruption. But again, I'll go back to the mental health. With Nixon, with some president who was corrupt but not mentally ill, they're hiding their crimes. That's what criminals do. They hide their crimes. With Trump, He does everything out in the open because there's no conscience. He doesn't see what's wrong with it. He doesn't see what's wrong with praising Putin for invading our ally, Ukraine, and then killing tens of thousands of Ukrainians. And Trump's quote is, he's a genius.
So
Putin was,
when,
go ahead.
sorry to interrupt, but like, so when he says, especially like the first thing that popped into my mind was because he'll say it even now when he talks about the perfect call that he made to the state of Georgia to get him, however many votes he keeps saying it was a perfect call. So he literally believes that. He's just not selling that line. He thinks that.
No, he does not. He knows he's lying. He does not
Okay.
believe this. That's a good question. It's an important distinction because people bring up this thing: is he delusional? And no, he. This is the con man. But personality disorders make good con men. No, he knows everything about that call was improper. But this is the audacity. This is where the audacity, in a bizarre sort of way, helps him. Because anyone before him, if they got caught in the same phone call, and that phone call was over an hour long, and he keeps badgering the attorney, the Attorney General of Georgia?
I think so, yeah.
To come up with, 80,000 votes, whatever the number of votes was. I just need these votes, and he won't let go of it. No, he's a mafia godfather demanding something of his client. He's not delusional. Delusional is Joe Biden shows up for work and Trump's still behind the Oval Office desk saying, no, I'm president, I'm president. And you have to call the funny farm, the guys in straitjackets, to take him away because he still thinks he's president. That's delusional. To get in the helicopter and fly to Mar-a-Lago and let Joe Biden be president for 4 years, he's not delusional when he tells you that he won it's a deliberate manipulation. So Trump is the domestic violence field and the sexual predator field are filled with personality disorders. But so they're a good way of understanding this. Trump is just the abusive father that is always dominating the family, and he'll do whatever he wants. And if you oppose him, then you get his wrath. But the family gets beat down for a while. So if dad comes home and he's not drunk tonight, or he actually treats us okay, what a great guy. We feel lucky that night. When what needs to be understood about Trump is that he has a rapist mentality about everything. He won't accept no. And he says that on tape too, the Access Hollywood tape. You can get away with it if you're a star. You can grab women by the genital, and if you're a star, they'll let you do anything. He's on tape. But look at his performance. Whether it's an individual woman, he attacked Jean Carroll in a dressing room. 2 other women testified at trial that he assaulted them, and the pattern was exactly the same, by the way. But he's the rapist mentality towards Denmark. I want Greenland. Denmark said no. He tells Panama he wants the Panama Canal. Panama has to say no. He tells Canada he wants them to be our 51st state. Canada has to say no. He told Mike Pence to certify an election. Mike Pence had to say no. He told the department, and this was treason too, by the way. He told the Department of Justice in December, just 3 weeks before January 6th, they told him there was no election fraud. Trump told the Department of Justice leadership, just say there was election fraud and I'll take it from there. That was treason. The Department of Justice said no. So this sexual assault mentality he has towards everything. And we, the people, have to keep saying no because he's never going to back down. He never says no, but he's not delusional. But it's a good question because between that and dementia, I'm very disappointed, even in my mental health community, there's all this stuff. It's wishful thinking that he's either delusional or he's demented. He's got dementia. And there are no signs of that at all. All you have to do is watch his speeches, including his 60-minute interview just yesterday. Your Uncle Ralph, who's on the memory ward of the local nursing home, could not be president of the United States. And he couldn't do two other interviews that'll prove he has no dementias. He did a speech, and all of his speeches are an hour or over an hour. He did a speech last October, I believe it was, at the American Bible Museum. You can't do that speech. It's worth watching. It's cringeworthy, but it's worth watching. He stays on point. And his point was he had an evangelical audience and he wanted to hit all the red meat for them with that speech. And then his State of the Union speech in January, where he spoke for a record, I think it was an hour and 59 minutes. If you have dementia, you cannot do that. Now, he always says a lot of crazy things in every speech, so people think he's losing it. But it's not delusional and it's not dementia. It's always on point to get a certain message across, no matter what it is. Like even Haitians are eating dogs and cats and geese. Yeah. You say, well, he's losing it. He's about to fall. But I've had this argument with psychiatrists now for 7 years is stop saying he's about to unravel and he's losing it. These things are deliberate. He knew that no Haitians were eating dogs and cats and geese, but he wanted that on film and he wanted millions of people to have this bigotry towards immigrants. And so he makes up lies, and they're so crazy that people think that he's delusional or something. Yeah. But he's not. It's manipulative. It's always manipulative.
Something you said earlier that really has been stuck in my head was you were talking about that he constantly tells on himself. You said that the criminal hides everything, but Trump tells on himself. And then you just brought up that 60 Minutes interview where I can't remember the reporter's name, but she reads part of the manifesto of the shooter, and in there, and I'm going to butcher it, but it was along the lines of that the alleged shooter would no longer tolerate allowing pedophiles and rapists, and I think there were a couple other categories in there to run the country, and Trump, obviously he attacks her. He calls, you're horrible people for reading that, and then says, I'm not a rapist, I'm not a pedophile. And she says, oh, you think he's talking about you?
Bingo. That was brilliant on her part. Yeah, these things give me flashbacks to when I was doing my prison work with all of my personality disorders. Trump is classic. All his ways of speaking and his ways. Yeah, she got him. He did a confession to the crime, those two crimes. He just confessed to you that he's a pedophile and a rapist because she said, oh, you think he was talking about you? Because the manifesto didn't use the word Trump, if I understand correctly.
I believe that's true.
He was talking about rapists and pedophiles, and Trump fell into the trap. It's the only good thing about personality disorders. And when I did prison work, I had two trick questions because they always flunk. They can't do these two things. And one is victim empathy. So get them talking about their victim, which they can't do because they can't feel empathy. And so the other one is spirituality. They cannot have a spiritual discussion because they have no idea the impairment with this disorder disconnects you from spiritual principles. And so whether it's he had no idea that depicting himself as Jesus Christ healing someone would turn off the base. Anyone, again, this is what I say, what's so off the scale abnormal about it is everybody since George Washington until Trump, every single president and everyone in between. And that's a lot of different personalities, even a lot of bigots and racists in that group, right? There's none of those men that could have depicted themselves as Jesus Christ healing someone. Even if they weren't religious, they would have known that that's offensive. But because Trump cannot connect to a spiritual dimension, he didn't know. Now, he took that one down, and he took that one down because the one thing he does believe in is votes. And so when he got feedback that, boss, you've gone too far with the Christian community with this one. You can't depict yourself as Jesus. That one he took down, but he didn't have the awareness not to do it. Just like the Saudi prince, or saying that Putin's a genius, or saying that he fell in love with Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un is responsible for
Yes.
not just tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of deaths in his country. But and so no president from George Washington could say they fell in love with this guy. I don't know if you're aware of this quote or not, when he said they fell in love.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets a lot worse than that. John Bolton, in his book, depicts things that are just classic personality. But the problem is, all these people that write these books, including John Bolton, they get all these things right. And I'm glad they're reporting on how disgusted they were and how inappropriate Trump was. But they never know it's all due to this mental illness. It's this basic, is that the way the military says it, our language is, they are maladaptive. So you get someone who's maladaptive. Well, you have to be adaptive. You have to be adaptive physically. How many push-ups and sit-ups can you do? And if you can't pass that, you're gone. You have to have a certain, mental ability. But they're maladaptive personality disorders to rules and regulations. And in the outside world, that would be the 10 Commandments and the rule of law. And that's why he's broken so many, is that they can't adapt to it because they don't even believe in it. Like I said earlier, anything that helps them is right, and anything that hurts them is wrong. Now, we would say that's a disqualifier for our high school principal, or any job. If
Yes.
just like if any high school principal in the country was caught on film saying you can grab women by their genitals and you can get away with it if you're a star, that community would say that high school principal has to go. We don't want him anymore. So every other job in America, we are still holding firm, but he's such an enigma. Like, he's so entertaining as a quirky personality that he gets a free pass on everything. And what I'm saying is, it's a shame because it's so basic, because what he demonstrates every day is something we don't allow any private to do. Like I said, if a private said he knew more than generals, if a private said, I think that Barack Obama was born in Kenya, and you say, well, private, that's your commander in chief, I'll give you about 15 seconds to change your mind. And if they're not a personality disorder, they suddenly change their mind, right?
Yeah.
But the personality disorder will buck you on that, because then they'll say, no, I don't think he is. I read such and such, whatever.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, because one of the things, and you kind of brought it up just a little bit, you touched on it just slightly. One of the covers that he has and consistently has is the American Evangelical Church. And that was for me, during and the people that listen to this, I mean, we've talked about this before, like this idea of deconstruction, where certain things in reality start happening, and they come into conflict with the things that you've been taught, and then it's the process of figuring out how that all works for you. But it was the rise of Trump in 2015 that for me was just like, number one, I don't understand this. I can't understand this. And I refuse to be part of this. And so, like, for me personally, I have always been a never Trumper. I was loud about it. Even when I was still like in the conservative church, I was very loud about it. But even now, he still enjoys that support, almost unwavering support. Even just recently, where right leading up to Easter, where he had Paula White, this conference with Paula White was at the podium, and Franklin Graham was on one side, and I can't think of the guy's name. He's a megachurch pastor in Dallas, on the other side. And she was saying just these, comparing the story of Jesus, regardless of what you think about the story, right? But she's comparing this Easter story literally to Trump, like linking them together, that Christ rose and Trump, you rose, and because you rose, we're all victorious. And nobody blinked an eye. Everybody outside the church, obviously, and the smaller sections of the church that aren't part of that evangelical machine, but nobody blinked an eye at it. And he still enjoys that. I know that you're not a pastor. I know that you're not a theologian or any of those kinds of things. But as somebody who is still in the work, why, and coming from the place that you've come from, why do people fall in line with that? What is
Well,
that? What's the mechanism that causes somebody to be like, yeah, I still support him. I'm going to go to Easter service, but yeah, that's fine.
I can address this because even though I try to stay in my lane and I want to be corrected if someone thinks I'm going outside my lane,
Right.
I actually, because of this diagnosis, I actually have a lot of experience with what we call religiosity, which is a mental health term. And it's no coincidence that among, especially the abuse in the abuse world, domestic violence, that there is a direct connection with not spirituality. Now, spirituality there's a spectrum. Spirituality is love based. That's on the one end. And then the large middle ground is called religion. And religiosity on this other side of the spectrum is pathological. So religiosity might make you gun down an abortion doctor outside a clinic because you're killing them for Jesus or something. Or religiosity might make you fly a plane into the Twin Towers in New York and be a martyr for your religion. It's pathological, but the things that are tied to mental health and to the psyche are power, control, and if you come from an abusive family, that's one way. Where if your father is an abusive drunk, but you're churchgoers, and see, in my career, it was not unusual at all to have people that were caught in crimes and they're huge Bible thumpers. They're not. They never. Or let me take a little side view because I did finish this thought about in prison. There were two tests that they always flunk: victim empathy. Do you have any empathy for your victim? And the other was spirituality. And so the trick question is: you say to the prisoner who's in prison for rape or assault or pedophile, tell me what is the message of Christ? And they'll look at you like it's a trick question. Well, it is a trick question because when I ask somebody what's the message of Christ, the answer should have something to do with love and compassion and nurturing and caring and treating the other and treating your neighbor and goodness and mercy and all that. And now they're not cognitively impaired, just like Trump is not cognitively impaired. So they might actually know the Bible better than me. So they can quote scripture to you. They could quote the Bible, just like a lot of Islamic terrorists can quote the Quran, but they don't absorb the message of compassion and love. It's victory. That's why, and even the words, there's like this dominion. I forget the title now. There's this dominion theology, dominion over Christian nationalism, which is completely anti-American, anti-constitutional. And the military, to go back to my roots, we are the example of this. We have things called chaplains, and the chaplains, they're priests and ministers and imams and rabbis. But also atheists are allowed in the military and can thrive in the military and make every rank that everybody else can make because we're non-denominational and we're non-religious. This group is trying to do that, and they see a power opportunity for Christianity over alles, to borrow the Deutschland over alles. It's Christianity overall, and it's an opportunity. You've got a guy, even though he's completely immoral and he's broken all these 10 commandments, or so many of them, and continues to, by the way. And if you're a Christian, you ought to be victim oriented at the least, at a minimum. Victim oriented, not perpetrator oriented, whether it's a sex crime or whether, let's just go back to other cases that Trump lost. He had a fraudulent charity and he had a fraudulent university. He paid a $5 million fine for the fraudulent charity and a $25 million crime for the fraudulent university. But there were victims. Nobody talks about who were all the people that signed up for his university thinking they were getting something and they were defrauded. Now, if you're a Christian, you shouldn't be on Trump's side for defrauding them. You should be for the ones who were defrauded, or you should be for his victims. This group, I'm not going to go name by name. I don't know these people. I don't know Paula White. I don't know Franklin Graham and all this, but I can read their quotes, and their quotes are so unchristian that if I wanted to be unkind, I would say, geez, they might be defining the Antichrist, because they're manipulative, they're hurtful. They're hurtful of people who are not them. Extreme examples would be Muslims or LGBTQ. But I have a Catholic background. Some of them go so far as to say, Catholics are in that group too, that aren't real Christians and all. Only they have the real message. But they see an opportunity. They're opportunists. The one thing they all have in common is they're good performers. And Trump is a performer. He had a TV show. He was a TV personality. And most of these people that I've seen that have mega churches and they're really good on stage. They have talents, and the talent has to do with charisma, and they're very verbal, great vocabularies. They know their Bible, but they know their Bible like a Muslim terrorist knows their Quran. They all cherry pick what they want. What they left out was the Good Samaritan, because to me, this was the most profound message in my life. And I had a lot of religious background, but the one that just changed my life was just reading what Jesus said in answer to this lawyer. How do you get to the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus, first, knowing he's the lawyer, says, well, what does it say in the law? And he says, well, you have to love the Lord your God with all your mind and all your heart, and your neighbor is yourself. And Jesus says, you've answered correctly. That's the law. And then the lawyer can't let Jesus get away. And he says, but who is my neighbor? And then starts the incredible thing that I think defines Christianity, is that this priest goes by. If somebody's robbed by thieves and thrown into a ditch, beaten up and robbed, thrown into a ditch, a priest comes by, doesn't want to get involved. A Levite comes by, which I guess would be a modern equivalent of a theologian or some learned person book. They don't want to get involved. And then a Samaritan comes. A Samaritan's a pagan. A Samaritan is not God's chosen people, to use sort of modern language or old language.
Quote
And
unquote,
so
yeah. Wrong religion, wrong race, all the wrongs. Yeah.
And that is the person that nurses him, takes him to an inn, pays for his recovery and all this. And so then Jesus asked Lord, so who was neighbor unto he who fell among thieves? And he says, well, the one who nursed him. And he says, you've answered correctly again. But the question was, how do you get to the kingdom of heaven? And it's how you treat your neighbors. In modern terms, that would be immigration. It would be your gay neighbor. It would be, anyone, the homeless, the poor, and Jesus was not wishy-washy about that. It was right on. And in fact, I tell people I'm a bit of a smart aleck, so I say it jokingly and I say it completely seriously, that I said I was a Catholic until my priest taught me the parable of the Good Samaritan, and then that parable became my religion. That's how strongly I feel about it. And the message is so clear. Jesus wasn't wishy-washy about these things. So this very clear message. So to get back to your question, so these charlatans, and the one from Dallas may be Reverend Hagee, you're referring to. I don't know. He has a mega church, and he's the first person. He's the first person I heard many years ago, even before Trump, I think. Hagee started from the pulpit, started using the term Islamofascism. And I thought, well, how hateful for a Christian minister, but how clever, because at that time anyway, we all hated fascists because our parents fought a world war against fascism. So it was Islamofascist to make you hate Muslims. And that's not the job of a Christian minister, to make you hate. It's to make you love.
Well
and
said.
So this group is latched on, and Paula White and all and Franklin Graham, he's had some horrible quotes that just trash Christianity. But don't leave out Mike Johnson, our Speaker of the House. He's not a minister,
100%.
but he's pushing Christian nationalism, and they're trying to equate Jesus with dominance again. And you see it in Pete Hegseth with his language about this war, where suddenly, we wiped out their, I forget the exact quote, but it's like, we wiped out their Air Force, we wiped out their Navy, all glory to God.
Yeah.
Again, I'll go back to this unprecedented since George Washington. No Secretary of Defense, of course, now he wants to be called Secretary of War, has ever gone before us and described some actions in Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan, and then put on the tail end of it, all glory goes to God for our actions. This is deliberate. And this goes back to Trump too. Is it delusional? No, it's not delusional. It's deliberate. It's just that they lack two ingredients, truth and love. But it's an agenda. And to your original question, like what makes people attracted to this? What makes people attracted to a bully? I guess it's either money or power. But then that would seem to negate you as a minister if those are your two interests. And this gets, but I think this is one where a congregation and the Constitution really match well, is that it should be all about we the people, or it should be all about your congregation and taking care, being a shepherd, a good shepherd to those. And we're losing all of that. But yeah, they banded together. And again, you could go back to Nazi Germany because,
yes, you can.
As I like to say, using my Catholic background, is it's not just that all these Nazis went to church on Sunday, they received communion on Sunday. And I don't know what other people would, if you're not Catholic, you may not get the significance of that, but that takes it to a whole other sacrilegious level when you're leading a sadistic life. Even a commandant of a concentration camp might be going to church on Sunday, is what I'm trying to say, and believing, like these people around Trump, believing that they are Christian, and then go to work on Monday morning throwing people into ovens and still believing you're Christian. So the only delusion going on is self-delusion.
That's a point. That's a good one. Well, let me ask you this, because I've got a hard deadline coming up, but I do want to ask you a final question, and I'm gonna reach back out because I do have some other questions that I really do want to dive into with you that we're just not going to have time today.
Right.
But I'll reach back out. We'll do a little part two. I find myself, especially right now, I find it sometimes very difficult to unplug and to find things that I enjoy, to do those things, just because sometimes everything, that's happening can just be overwhelming. And for example, I had a really difficult time. I love March Madness. I love college basketball. I love all college sports, but I love March Madness. And did we lose him? Are you there? Okay, you're still there. Just your screen.
No, I'm sorry, I have to move because we've been on so long, I got a low battery here. So let me get plugged in.
Got to plug it back up. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. But I found myself this year having real difficulty just enjoying it like I normally do. So I'm curious, for somebody who's so in the work, and I mean, you write constantly. One of the things I want to talk about with you next time is a Islamophobic conference that you attended with the Cedras were there, and another, one of those guys that claimed to be something over in the Middle East and come over here and, I found Jesus and now here's my book and speaking tour. So I want to talk about those things with you, but what do you do to keep yourself energized and in the fray?
Well, first, let me say something about you, is that if you can enjoy March Madness, and I always love March Madness myself, and I've always been pretty much a football freak as well, college and NFL.
Love it. Same.
But the fact that you can't enjoy it as much, there's a word for that. It's called you're normal. You shouldn't be. Just like if you were in Nazi Germany, you should have found yourself, I'm really not enjoying the soccer competition, the soccer match as much as I did, because three of my Jewish neighbors who were, they really, I don't think they were bad people, and they were taken away by the Gestapo the other day. Well, that ought to hinder your ability to enjoy the football or whatever. So that's normal. Right now, my main release, my whole life I can't do right now because I'm about to get an MRI on my knee. I've always been a distance runner. But even as a clinician, as a therapist, I always told all of my clients that, even if they were seeking something like antidepressant medication or anti-anxiety medication, something like that, I always put in a plug for physical exercise, breaking a sweat. I think the MDs can do their lecture on how it's good for your heart and in the physical body, but I was a mental health professional. And I've always thought that that's something that's very underestimated about mental health, because I always thought in my adult life, my distance running in particular, or, I did other sports, play tennis and basketball, stuff like that. But any physical activity, I think, is really good for your mental health. Right now, I'm dying because I can't run right now because I have a knee injury. So, but
That's good news.
I think that, well, I have a great wife. And so I have, I just have a great partner, and that helps. And I've got a crazy dog, and she helps distract. For my wife, it's her gardening. I'm not a gardener, but I can see how that really perks her up and helps her out, because she does a lot. My wife's an activist and runs a peace center and does all kinds of work with the police departments and district attorneys and politicians and rabbis and ministers, all kinds of things. So she's really busy. But you touched on something. You do have to take care of yourself and find things. And for some people, it's hobbies. And I think that even if you aren't enjoying the game, the March Madness or the NBA playoffs or whatever, I think it's okay. Turn it on anyway. And if you're not enjoying it as much, or you find yourself because, whatever, kids are dying in Gaza or Ukraine or Iran or somewhere that you can't find yourself caring which team wins or something, that's okay. That's fine. But if it's a little distraction, maybe that's fine too. Just like I think most of us, if we're honest about it, even something as simple as it's a sunny day versus a rainy day, it actually does have an impact on our mood. Just light alone. And so, that old expression, things look better at the break of dawn or something like that, in the light of day. So these things are true. And for some people, it's food. I say nothing wrong with that. If, anything that helps you, and even if it's a little, my mother used to call her chocolates her sneakies.
Yes.
My sneakies. There, you open a sock drawer and there's sneakies in there, a chocolate bar. So
Give me some dark chocolate all day long.
My nutritionist friends wouldn't like me saying this, but I say, why not? Life is short. And if these things, you find the things, for a lot of people, it's their faith.
Yeah.
Or it's prayer, or it's fellowship. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Fellowship with your
people. Yep.
Your faith community, or perhaps your minister is giving you, you walk into service and you're not feeling too good, and something is said that gives you hope. Either the pastor had like a great message, or maybe it was just somebody said a word like leper, and you said to yourself, well, geez, I don't have leprosy.
Yes. Just something to remind you. Yes.
Yeah. Or as my older brother likes to say, because he's a smart aleck like me, like if you say something, you give him some poor me thing, and he says, well, it beats a burning stick in the eye, so
that's
so
fair.
there's always someone worse off. And I think, to me, this relates to Christianity, because in Christianity, there is this almost an obligation, but that's kind of a strict word. There is a tendency toward helping others, especially those that are less fortunate than you.
Or at least it should be. Yes.
And that is therapeutic. Somebody came up with an expression, and maybe a biblical expression, you would know more than me, but it's a very old expression. Virtue is its own reward, or it's better to give than receive.
Yeah.
This actually relates back to Trump. Is if for a narcissist or an antisocial, it absolutely is not better to give than receive. It's always better to receive. They don't care to give. They're incapable of giving. They're only taking. But if you have normal mental health, it actually is therapeutic and feels good to help someone out. Every parent knows that.
You're giving.
Every parent knows that, because right off the bat, as soon as you become a parent, there's certain things that you start to sacrifice, like your sleep.
Money.
Suddenly, someone else in the world is for the first time more important than you. And if you're a personality disorder, I'll go back to Trump's diagnosis. That's a bummer. Yeah, and you can't do that. They are not more important than you. But for all the rest of us, you start to sacrifice for the other. I mean, even a mama bird or a mama squirrel or a mama
100%.
bear, you'll watch, even in the wild animal kingdom, the animal will risk their life to save their offspring. They're saying, you're more important than me, even my life. And this goes back to my military thing and why it's hard for me not to be angry, is that I spent my life around people. And again, firefighters and cops could be this, fit this as well, is that my life is not as important as your freedom. And so, like Joe and Steve are in a burning building, and this firefighter is going to come in and then climb this ladder and pull us out, instead of saying, that's their tough luck.
Yeah.
The personality disorder is incapable of that. But here's the part that people miss out on. They miss out on this with combat veterans, is that you're risking your life for others, and especially saving the life of another. You can feel better about yourself than you felt about yourself the day before that, because you know you did something worthwhile. And so, to get back to your question, what can you do for yourself? It may be just eating chocolate and taking care of yourself, but it might be for some people, you know what, I got to get off my duff, and there's a homeless shelter, or there's a soup kitchen, or there's something, whatever it is. And you might be surprised that after doing that work, your mood is better, because like I can't save some kid in Gaza, but maybe I can save some kid in Philadelphia. We're all in this together, and
We are.
Until we get to that Joseph McCarthy moment, like in the 1950s, have you no decency, sir, where they finally had put up this guy and his abuse, and we need to get there. And I wish I got to say this actually on our recorded thing, is that I don't think we can get there unless the leadership, either the military leadership or the congressional leaderships, understands this diagnosis. And what I didn't get to say, it's a shame in the interview, is that this is by far the least known diagnosis, which is why he's getting away with it. Is that it's I can't believe I left this out. It's so important in psychology, is that personality disorders are what's called egosyntonic. So there's ego dystonic and systonic. Dystonic, thank God for all of us, is how the medical model always works. Is there's you and I, we get a toothache, we get a headache, we get something goes wrong, and we know it's abnormal. It's not normal. We don't want a toothache. We got to get rid of it. And so you go to mental health for the same reason. You have depression, anxiety. You don't feel good. You recognize it as not normal, less than normal, and you go to have it fixed. The dentist fixes you. The headache medication fixes you. Surgery fixes you. And even all of mental health is based up on the medical model: depression, anxiety, PTSD, everything, except personality disorders. They are syntonic, so they don't feel abnormal. They feel normal. If Trump met you and I, he would know he's better than both of us put together. There's nothing wrong with him. He's perfect. And which is the problem, right? This is the problem. You can't have somebody who knows more than the generals, et cetera, et cetera. So they have no symptoms. Their crimes are their symptoms. The rape is the symptom. The pedophile is the symptom. Though their actions are the symptoms, but they don't go to mental health. And so people ask me correctly, well, Steve, if they don't go to mental health, how did you become an expert? You're saying you're an expert. And I'm saying if I went into private practice and hung out my shingle, I'd be as clueless as the rest of you. But in the military, it gave me the job to find out about this particular least known mental illness, because we have all these rules and regulations, and they cannot obey rules. They're above the rules. They're better than the rules.
That makes sense.
And so we don't catch all of them. So you're still going to end up with a war atrocity, a Geneva Conventions violation. But because we have so many rules and regulations right from the start, from basic training, we catch most of them.
Yeah.
And they interview like Trump always interviews, completely abnormal. But yeah, so it's called egosyntonic. They feel normal. And so they convince other people that they're normal because they have no mental health record. So maybe you and I could talk about that some other, maybe we can talk about that in a subsequent thing, because it's a subject that's long overdue. And I'll shut up. This last thing I want to say, this subject is, even when we're done with Trump, It's a subject long overdue because almost all sex offenders and these people that shoot up our schools and kill our, like a Uvalde,
Mm-hmm.
school, you shoot up a bunch of kindergarten kids. Of course, if you could shoot 23 kindergarten kids with an AR-15, we all know there's something mentally wrong with you, right? Just to do that act. But they don't have any mental health records. Every one of these cases, I turn to my wife and I say, now watch, everybody says he's crazy. Trump just did it with this guy over the
Yeah.
weekend. He's crazy, right? Everybody knows he's crazy. But I'm going to ask the question I always do, does he have a mental health record? And he's probably a personality disorder. He has no record. It's syntonic. What he does feels normal to him. Anyway, let you go.
Well, friends, thanks for following along. That was Steve Nolan. Make sure that you check the show notes for the links of his books, but also his writings, that the things that he's still doing now. You're going to want to check some of those out. I want to say thank you to everybody that is following along, that's listening, that's subscribing. We keep getting asked things like, what's the best way to help out? Honestly, the best way to help out is hit follow, to share the work. That is the simplest and easiest way to make sure that this stuff continues on. None of us are getting paid for any of this stuff. We just feel like this is what needs to be done. And so we're just so thankful that you allow us any space into your life. And we're hopeful that this is a bright spot in your week. Hey, wherever you find yourself this day, I hope that you are having the exact day that you need. Don't forget, you might be the only voice of reason that somebody hears today, so don't be afraid to use it. All right, friends, until next time.